Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another PhotoJoseph live show. Thank you for joining us today. I know it's been a couple of weeks. I really do need to get back into a regular schedule here, and I think this inconsistent schedule is definitely not definitely not helping the YouTube algorithm and getting the notifications out there because there aren't too many of you here right now. But for those of you that are here, say hello. Say hello in the chat. It's always lovely to hear from you. I'm going to go ahead and bring my guest right on into the show just because, we got to do that. Let's bring him in. This, my friends, is my friend, Lee Herbet. Lee, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, it is my pleasure. We've only been trying to do this for like 6 months now. I think
6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, we wanted to do this.
I can't tell you how many times we've tried turning it off and on again.
Jesus, seriously. Well, we tried doing it with the ATEM. What do you call it? The loop, the thing, the transmit, the what?
Yeah.
What's that thing called?
Yeah. The talkie-talkie.
The talkie-talkie. Right, the talkie-talkie. The talkie-talkie totally was working for everybody everywhere except for you from Australia. So for some reason, it just doesn't like you calling in from there. I don't know why. And it just never worked for us. But now... What's that?
Well, no, because our internet's run by sort of like about 5 or 6 squirrels on a treadmill. And I think 2 of them have the year off because of, they're in isolation because of COVID. So,
right. Yeah, how do you fit a mask on a squirrel? Like their ears can barely even hold it. I mean, how does that even work?
Carefully.
Very carefully. With staples? Is that what was that?
Oh,
come on. That's a European vacation. Was it not European winter vacation? National Lampoon's winter vacation.
It was Bill Murray's Scrooged, where he wanted them to staple the antlers onto the mice.
Staple the antlers. Use staplers. That was the one. That was the one. Oh my goodness, that was terrible. We do have at least somebody in the house. So I'm using the chat system that I used last time, which I'm now seeing why it's failing miserably. I was hoping that it was going to work, and it's not. But that's okay. We're just going to go old school here, and we're going to try it. Let's bring it up here and see if it works. Hey, look at that. It does work. Hello, Jukla from Finland. It is lovely to have you on. That is fantastic. Thank you for joining us. So Lee and I, we wanted to talk. Well, we want to talk tech. We want to talk, I guess I got to bring up the right lower third. Let's bring up the one that's got both of us on there. There we go. We want to talk tech. We want to talk HDR because that's a particular area of passion for the both of us. And we want to talk about whatever we want to talk about because we don't get to talk that often. And so it's one of those kind of a days. But let's start with a little bit of introduction on who you are, Mr. Lee. And you can tell the audience a bit of your background. You can choose to include or omit the 15 years as a stand-up comic part. That's up to you. But I'm sure the audience would love to know who in the heck they're hearing from today.
Okay, well, I'll try and give you the semi-abridged version. So I was born in the Middle East. I grew up in Africa. I spent 3 years living in London, then a few years living in Sydney, then 10 years living in Auckland, New Zealand, and now I've been in Melbourne, Australia for just over 10 years. So I like to describe my accent as global mutt. In terms of careers, as we were discussing a little bit just before we came on air, I actually started out in musical theatre out of high school and then moved into doing stand-up. And at the same time as I was doing stand-up comedy at night, I was working in IT during the day. So I was a web developer, and then I moved into IT support. Then I was a sysadmin, then I was a network engineer, and then I went through a very early midlife crisis and moved into IT sales, and then moved into IT training. And throughout all of that, particularly with the stand-up side of things, I used to film all of my performances. Not so much because I like the look of my face, because who does, but it was more to analyze my performances, because at least for me, when I got up on stage, the adrenaline's pumping and the endorphins are going, and you get off stage, you're like, what the heavens did I talk about?
Right.
And so it was good for me to videotape those. First I audio taped them, and then when I could afford videotapes, I would videotape them and analyze, okay, well, that got a laugh, that didn't, I need to work on that and move that, and so on. But if you turn up to any place where there's actors or stand-ups or performers with a camera, suddenly everyone, hey, can you shoot a promo for me? And can you do a show reel for me, or things like that? And that's kind of how I started on the filming side of things. And I got into the tech side of things because I had a girlfriend at the time who needed a DVD made for her mother. And so I got into DVD Studio Pro,
Oh, wow.
which led to a couple of weeks of me doing the math involved with MPEGs and bit rates, and I got really nerdy into that. And that's kind of how I got into the techie side of things.
Okay.
I did actually the DVD got made, so that's good. That end result was important. And fast forward sort of many years later, I worked for Apple for many years as a trainer, and eventually I was doing so much sort of video production internally and really enjoying it. And in the nicest possible way, they were like, well, look, a role like that isn't going to exist in Australia. So if you want to do that, go out and do it on your own. So back in 2014, I went out and started my own video production company. Actually, I only started the production company about 6 months into leaving Apple. Like that was what I wanted to do. But because all my background and my qualifications were in training, I started off as like a training consultant. And then a good friend of mine who was the general manager of an ad agency came to me and said, hey, we've got a video project that I'd like you to bid on because I think you'd be perfect for the project. And it was funny how, and I'll talk actual numbers because I don't see any problem with talking numbers. And so she said to me, right, well, the budget for the job is $15,000. And I immediately said, oh, well, I can't do it. And she said, why? And I said, well, I've never charged more than $3,000 for a video before. And she said to me, well, I've seen your work. She said, well, look, that's the budget. I've seen your work. It's totally worth it. This job's going out to tender to you, so just don't mess it up. And I think, and that project went so well. Originally, it was just for an Australia-wide campaign, and the client liked so much, they used it all the way across Asia Pac. And more than anything else, that gave me the courage to go to my wife and say, I can make money out of this video malarkey. And, at that point, it was sort of like, the bottom hand was we're doing this much video production and this much training, and we flipped it to doing 10% training and 90% production. And that's pretty much what the last 7 years has been. So I still do a little bit of training because I really enjoy that. But my real passion lies in filming stuff and editing stuff and putting together stories and that kind of thing. So that's
your story.
That's the abridged version.
Excellent. I wanted you to talk about the last couple of years of COVID and how that's affected your production business, because I know that Australia's been in a pretty gnarly lockdown. But before you get into it, I just want to remind the people who are watching live, by all means, drop your questions in at any time. We will, throughout, I'll just be keeping an eye on the chat and I'll pull up questions as we go. If you have any questions for Lee or, of course, for me, but just drop them into the chat at any time and I will drop them up, pull them up as we can. So yeah, Lee, what have you done over the last couple of years with the COVID thing? How's that affected production?
So COVID's been interesting. I mean, it's like my wife says, we're riding the Corona coaster. And it has very much been like that. Whereas, it's weird because ironically, because I've sort of lived all over the place and I love traveling. Most of my clientele was outside of Australia. So I used to travel a lot internationally. Like I'd have about 5 trips a year to the US and then a few to Asia and Africa and all over the place. And at the beginning of the pandemic, sort of like from March, for the first 3 to 4 months, it was a nightmare. Like I had 5 really big projects all just go, done because I couldn't get out of the country. Yeah. And I think so that was pretty scary. But then we sort of opened up a little bit in sort of June last year, and then Melbourne, where I live, we went back into lockdown in July, and we were in lockdown for like 4 months after that. But interesting enough, during that lockdown, we actually had quite a few things sort of come up. So first of all, there were productions where normally the client would fly me out to wherever it was, and I would manage the production and shoot it with a team locally. And obviously I couldn't get there, but I know enough shooters around the world where I could, if they need something shot wherever, as long as the shooters can leave their houses because of lockdown, I can get stuff shot. So I actually found quite a few clients coming back and going, hey, look, we still need this stuff produced. Certainly wasn't at the levels that it was before. Mm-hmm. So I had a little bit of that going on. And we actually ended up doing quite a few what I call studio in a box productions. So one of the jobs I had to do was I've got a client who does a lot of they they did a lot of events, conventions, things like that. So all of those became virtual. And so instead of getting the speakers to come to them, they had to film the speakers. And what I would end up doing is I would put all the gear that I would normally use for a shoot, for like a heads up, interview like this. So, good key light, good hair light, good fill light. So 3 lights, camera, teleprompter, some wireless mics. I would just pack all of those into a couple of Pelican cases. We would courier that to the talent. I would then spend about 3 hours on FaceTime talking them through setting it all up, and then they would film themselves. It all comes back to me and I put it all together. And I'll say it's one of those where it wasn't as good as if I had done it,
Sure.
obviously. But it was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. Particularly the first one we had to do actually involved a green screen. So I actually had to send a green screen to the talent because they were very specific. They wanted a black background, and I thought instead of trying to find a black whatever and trying to light that, let me just send a green screen. I can make it whatever I want.
Okay.
My favorite part of that was there's a part where the talent was demoing something with a mouse on the table, and they were obviously they couldn't see the green screen that was behind them, so it was just out of frame of the green screen. So I had to do some editing magic, and if anyone ever saw that presentation, I think it was somewhere publicly, when you see the top down shot of the hand on the mouse moving around, that's my hand on my mouse. That's not their hand.
Because the shot just wasn't wide enough to catch it, and it was just too disconcerting to see them.
Yeah.
Wow. That's too funny.
Well, their hand basically just disappeared out of frame.
Right.
So I was like, I've got to show it, but I can't. So I just filmed my own hand on a table.
That's hysterical.
Kind of looked the same and did that.
That's interesting that actually worked out, sending people the gear and having them set it up. Because I've done similar stuff, definitely not at that caliber, because the gear that we were sending out was much lower end, I think. But it was for live events, and we had to get him to set up with a camera and a microphone to do a live thing. But man, it was like the least technical people ever. And they just never wanted to put the effort in, or you'd have some of them were kind of semi-celebrities, or this is all a Broadway thing. So a lot of their big Broadway actors, and they're like, well, you want to interview me, that's fine, but I'm not putting any effort into this. You're like, please, but we just need a little better sound and light. But even the ones who wanted to. So what's Zoom again? You're like, oh boy. Yeah,
it's funny. I think my training background really helped with that.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine yours helped quite a lot as well, because I think one of the superpowers that you need to develop as a trainer is patience and empathy.
Yeah.
You need to kind of put yourself in their shoes and go, how can I explain this in a way that they're going to understand? And I always assume I'm explaining it to my mother. And if I can explain something in a way that my mother can understand it, then I'm pretty confident they'll understand. Although I'll tell you a little caveat that I found. I'm sure you've found this by now. The first one that we did, the talent's pointing the camera, so we're doing this over FaceTime, and they're pointing their iPad or their iPhone, I can't remember which was, at the back of the camera to show me the EVF, to show me like what the setup looks like. And I'm looking at it on FaceTime. I'm going, yeah, no, that looks pretty good. I think we're ready to shoot. And the talent's going, it looks a little bit dark. And I'm like, no, it looks fine to me. And I said to him, look, can you just shoot like 10 seconds of video on the camera and then just email me those 10 seconds and we can look at it? First of all, Apple, I love you, but please put SD card slots back into the laptops, because it was on an SD card. He didn't have a dongle, so we ended up having to connect so it was a Sony A7S Mark III, no, Sony A7 III, not S Mark III. It has one out here. So I then had to talk him through connecting his iPhone to the camera via Bluetooth and transferring it via Bluetooth to his phone.
Can't the camera do a USB storage mode and connect to the computer directly and mount as a hard drive?
Someone, being me, didn't think to send the cable, because I was just going to send the camera, send me back the camera. I've got the SD card. I didn't think to, and now I send the cable. But here's the thing. So once I got the video back, it was dark, and we worked out what was happening was the FaceTime call was adjusting exposure to make the back of the camera look as good as possible. So don't trust FaceTime if you're trying to remote monitor a camera over FaceTime.
Wow. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? Because
Yeah.
obviously the software is just doing its best to make the image look as good as it possibly can. Goodness gracious. I'm gonna bring up a couple people saying hello, and it looks like I might have actually fixed the chat module. I deleted it and re-added it, and it's actually sticking right now. So with that in mind, I'm going to hit the little chatty thing again, and then bring up some other hellos. We got a hello from Virginia from Robert. Robert's also saying
Ooh.
that it looks and sounds great. What are we using? So let's we'll come back to that in a moment. We'll talk about the whole tech setup here because actually I think it is pretty good. Oh, and amen to the SD card wish. Yeah, well, yeah, that ain't happening. Sorry, man. These things are getting thinner
Well,
and thinner.
rumors.
Not,
There's rumors. Fingers crossed.
yeah. I mean, hey, I would be very happy to see that. Although it'd be interesting to see just how good one would really be, because I've been doing. I'm actually one of the next videos I'm going to do is comparing the speed, the performance of different SD card readers, just to show how much value
Mm.
there is in a quality one. And the ones that I use are these guys right here from Program. Let me get this light on so you can actually see.
Ah, jinx.
Ah, come on. Hold on. Now
Here's
I'm
the
trying
pro.
to.
Here's the pro grade one.
That's fine. I don't remember which button. There. That's the power light on this. But I just put a new light up here for my side camera light. Got to get that up so it is
Yeah,
lit.
that one.
There we go. That's the Program one, and this is beautiful because it's a dual card reader, USB-C, and is it going to focus on that? There we go, USB-C.
Hang on, wait.
These are
Wait. Let me get super techie with this.
okay.
I'm gonna try and light this with my watch.
Okay.
There we go.
Well, here I'll show you what I'm going to do next week. I think it's going to be next week's video. Here we go, or the week out. Anyway, so this one, for those who use camera, come on, go. There it is. The CF Express. Come on, is it going to focus on it? It's trying to grab my, it's kind of hard for it to do that one little bit. I'm going to put my hand here so I can grab that. There we go. Should be able to read that now. So CF Express.
CF Express.
This is Thunderbolt. This is ripping fast. This is crazy fast if you're shooting with that kind of card. Anyway, so my point is that with the cards getting, or the readers like this that are so fast, do I really want to go back to a slower internal reader? Obviously, convenience factor is fantastic, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Well,
We'll see.
again, it's interesting you say that because I remember thinking about this because I'm a Sony shooter, so we're all a CF Express card A type because we like to be difficult. And I was thinking about that when I was witch casting a while ago when these when I got these cameras a few months ago, that like if Apple was going to put an SD card reader, like are they going to put in one of those multiple ones? Because like on the Sony cameras, you can put in a standard SD card or a CF Express A in the same slot, like it's like a dual slot.
Oh, interesting.
So
Okay.
like yes, so would Apple do something like that? But then like, do they do A or B? They'd have to do B because B is far more widespread than A. But having said that, if they were going to do it, again, I know nothing. I think they would just be a standard SD card reader because they're not putting it in there for you and me.
Right.
They're putting it in for our mothers.
Right.
And most people would just need an SD card reader.
Yeah, and another reason I would say they're probably not going to do it is because they don't want people shooting with other cameras. They want people shooting with their iPhone, and then it's all wireless. It's just there. Why would we encourage people to actually use other cameras? I don't know. I mean, that's a bit. It might be a bit dark, but
I think there's enough. I think there's enough people at Apple that are aware of reality. That it's like. I'm glad you want everyone, and let's be honest. I mean, look, quite frankly, 98% of the photos I take are with my phone anyway.
Of course. Yeah.
So they're right, but it would still be nice for me, and it's all about me, if I could get that massive data off of my camera. I mean, look, having said that, for me, it's not a big deal because everything I capture goes onto an Adamus recorder, so it's plugging straight into my Shuttle XL. And
right, you're probably not going to get an SSD card reader in your MacBook Pro. That's probably not going to happen.
No, and right. I've made peace with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So Robert had asked what our setups were. So why don't you explain your technical setup on that, and then I'll talk about how I'm getting you into the show and mixing it and everything else here. So what's your camera, mic, and lighting setup over there?
Cool. So in terms of lighting, I've got an Aperture 120D, I think Mark 1. On a big softbox with an egg crate because I found when I didn't have the egg crate, there was too much spill off of the softbox because I want my background to be darker because here it's actually daytime. It's like 2:20 in the afternoon. So I've got the shutter down, but there's possible daylight coming up. So I used to have just the 120 with a softbox, but again, too much spill. So I put the egg crate, and that's done wonders in terms of
Sure.
just having it directionally on me. Then I've got an aperture MC on this side just to fill this side of my face. And actually, if I turn that off, let me just see if I can find the button easily. He says confidently. You can see there, you really need that just to fill up the left side of me. And that's magnetized to my mic stand. So that just makes life easier.
Is that one of the little?
And then I've got, the little ones. Actually, I'll just take it off. So so it's just that in its little softbox.
There you
go. And then I've got 3 more of those behind me, one set up for red, green, and blue. So it's a bit pedantic, but my background's RGB.
I got it. I saw that.
Thank you. It's I actually, there's times when I pull out, I'm about to put the green on the left hand side. No, green goes in the middle. And then in terms of, it's my wife's a very patient woman. Camera is and actually I want to ask your opinion about this. So the camera is an A7 III, a Sony A7 III, and that's going in via HDMI into my ATEM. I used to use A6300, but then I thought, well, I've got the A7 III, I may as well. But A7 III seems like a bit of a waste to use this as a webcam, and I think the A63 would be fine. The A7's got better autofocus, but how often do I actually need the autofocus?
Right.
So I might switch that back to the A6300 because that's kind of like a throwaway camera. Not a throwaway camera, but it's,
I know what you mean. Yeah,
less. I'm gonna get more money if I resell the A7 III sort of thing. And then in terms of audio, this is a Rode Podcaster mic, I believe, and that's going into a Focusrite 212C.
The USB interface.
That is,
Is it USB
so it's going in via XLR. No, so the microphone is XLR going into the Focusrite, which has got an XLR input, and the Focusrite is via USB going into the computer. And then I've just got Shure headphones in to do my monitoring.
So that's interesting. You've got your audio routing into the computer as a USB input, and then your video is obviously from the camera through the ATEM and then USB in. So you have a separate audio and video input, which I do see that you're ever so slightly out of sync, but I wasn't sure if it was the connection or if it's your setup or what. But now I'm going to blame your setup.
You're just getting old.
Wow.
Old.
I thought I was getting younger because I could tell, even on this little tiny confidence monitor that I got of you in front of me, that you're not quite in phase. Because technically that should be routing into the camera, but why not take the audio output from your interface and route that into the camera and then bring the audio and video through the HDMI from the camera into the ATEM?
It's mostly laziness because I do quite a lot of podcasts and I also record quite a lot of like instructional videos and things like that. So there's a lot of times where I'm not using the camera and I'm just using the mic for audio, and I can't be bothered to unplug it. Like I use the ATEM when I need the camera, but when I don't need the camera, I don't use the ATEM. So I just use, just leave the mic.
The interface that you're using, does it, because I'm not familiar with it. You said it was a Scarlett?
Yeah.
Does it, so it's got USB out, it has a line out, I assume.
Maybe. You know what? It's been under my desk for so long.
Yeah, because if it has a line out, then those are probably simultaneously hot. So you could send the audio from the Scarlett into the camera and into the USB at the same time. And then when you're doing something with video, use audio from the ATEM. And when you're doing just audio, use audio from the Scarlett directly. If it has that. That's an idea.
Yeah, that could work. Yeah. I'll find a cable and I'll have a play. Yeah, good suggestion.
Because that is, I just had a consulting call with someone earlier today about a similar type of setup, and they were trying to figure out a problem, and the problem exactly was that they had their audio over USB into the computer, totally independent from their camera going into the ATEM and in. It's like, well, that's why you're out of sync. So.
Oh, and you'll love this. It's not even going directly in via USB. It's going via USB into a hub, into a USB hub, which is then plugged into a Thunderbolt hub, which is then plugged into my computer. What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? I despise hubs. They're the bane of all existence. They have such a bad tendency to be the source of every problem. Oh, yeah. Okay, so that's your setup. Very nice. And to answer your camera question, I don't know that I'm the wrong person to ask if that camera that you're using is overkill, because I'm using a Lumix BGH1 as my webcam, but it's also routed into
Yeah,
15
wrong
different
person to ask.
places. Um, it's routed into 15 different places in here simultaneously, so it's kind of a big setup. But good. So cool on the setup. And then on this end, well, my camera is a Lumix BGH1. I got a microphone up here that's, I always forget what it is. It's some kind of a shotgun mic. What is this thing? I always forget the brand of this thing, and let's see, rotate it. It is a Audio Technica. That's it, AT875R. It's actually a great mic, very low cost, high quality XLR microphone, and that XLR is running into the BGH1 directly, so that I don't have to worry about powering it and don't have to worry about sync. The routing of my camera through my switching system is way beyond the scope of this show. I could talk about that for 2 hours and still not cover everything. Part of that's because I forget where things are, and whenever I change things, I'm like, or when I'm troubleshooting, I'm like, okay, it goes from A to B to C to D to B to D. Like, where is the path? And I finally find the problem. But everything is routed through multiple ATEMs, plus I'm using a software overlay for our lower thirds. So just to talk about what's on screen right now. So I'm on the BGH1, which is routed into an ATEM mini on my desk, which then gets passed through to an ATEM 2ME, a much bigger ATEM in a rack out in the other room. The video coming in from Lee, I'm talking to him through something called Mimo Live, and Mimo Live's built-in call system called Mimo Caller. And it's quite a nice system, and I've used it in the past, and it was quite unreliable, but they've made some updates to it, and so we're trying it out again today, and it's been great so far. And basically, I send him a URL, and he just clicks on that, it opens up in a web browser, and that's it. He doesn't need to install any software, and he's getting a direct feed from me, and I can choose in software what I want to send him, whether I want to send him the program or just me or literally anything that the software can see, I can send him. Same thing with audio. And then I'm taking his video, and I could, in Mimo, build this whole layout that you see here, but because I already have this layout set up for super source on the ATEM, basically I'm taking his video, converting that, routing that through a Blackmagic SDI, what is it, an Ultra Studio Mini, I think, and sending that into the ATEM over SDI, and then it's just another source on the ATEM, and then I'm building this with SuperSource. Now the lower thirds are coming from Mimo, so I can trigger those independently. So let's see, if I hit this button, it'll drop those and bring up the chat, although I guess I don't have a chat active, but let's do it. Here we go. Don says, yes, it has a line out to go to the ATEM, works really well. There you go. There's your question about whether your audio interface has a line on it. So I can bring that up. If I send that off, I've got a separate one that brings up just me, or of course I've got the two up on there, and that's all being controlled in Mimo. And the whole thing is being actually controlled through a Stream Deck on my desk with all these shortcuts. And that's like 1% of the setup. It's a bit ridiculous, but it's kind of fun. Oh, and the video in the background, that blue, swishy, very slow animation back there, it's like a 5-minute loop that is playing off of a hyperdeck and as a back plate for the super source. So it's like cool. It's a bit much.
Actually, but by the way, it's like I should have been. Well, it's obviously it's got a line out because that's what my headphones are plugged into. So.
But that would be a headphone out, which is not the same as a line out, but it would still work.
Oh yeah. There's probably actually. Let me just pick it up and have a look. No. Things are. Oh yes, it does have outs because that's what's going to my speakers.
Look at that.
I'll fiddle.
You'll fiddle.
I'm sure
Anyway, so that is that setup. Yeah. On a very low level of it. Let's talk a little bit about HDR, because it is an area of passion for the two of us, and it is an area of the wild, wild west. And yeah, why don't we start with your, I guess if there is a backstory to HDR, kind of how you got into it. Is there a story? I mean, I don't know that I even have a real story about it other than I wanted to try it and I did, but.
There is. So being a very, very out and proud Apple fanboy, so I cut in Final Cut, and they've been quite forward looking in terms of HDR, particularly in ProRes RAW. So I was at NAB in 2018, I think it was, when they announced ProRes RAW, and I was part of a media team that got slightly early access to it. So we went out, and again, there was no reason for me to bring my FS5 to NAB, but I'm a nerd, so I brought it with, and I had my Adamus, whatever it was back then. So we got an early, like, I mean, like 24 hours ahead, like a beta of the ProRes RAW sort of thing. And I was like, cool, let's go out and play. And we went out on the strip and we shot some stuff and we got back and it looked awful. And I've wanted to know why ever since. Um, and, and that sort of, that's kind of started it all. But that got me, looking deeper into, how Apple talks about wide gamut libraries and all that kind of stuff. And I also think I've been involved in some other projects which I got to shoot some really cool stuff with ProRes RAW. But particularly the thing that gets me excited about HDR is you think about what manufacturers have tried in the past where, we went from HD to UHD. That was a big deal because you could see the difference on a TV between HD and 4K. Then there was 3D, not so much. Now they're talking about 8K, and I can see the advantages of 8K capture. I think for most, and I can see the advantage for 8K delivery in some niche situations like giant screens for the Olympics and things like that. But I think for home
Cinematic.
TV users, yeah, like
going
home
to the
TV
cinema,
users,
sure.
I don't see like I don't see us delivering 8K. Like I'm sure eventually we will deliver an 8K on YouTube, but I don't see the point.
Right.
Whereas HDR, again, my poor mother, I could show my mother the advantages of HDR over non-HDR and she can get it.
Right.
My mother's the example of every man in the sense of, and that really is like my little spiel that I sort of do where I'm talking to editors and so on. I'm talking about HDR is that imagine, and for those who aren't familiar with HDR, really simple explanation. Generally, when you're looking at standard SDR, standard definition, standard dynamic range television, your brightness is shown from 0 to 100 nits. Nits is the way you measure brightness. So 0 to 100. HDR theoretically can go up to 10,000. Now 10,000 would burn out your retinas in your eyes, so don't ever look at anything that's 10,000 nits. But most TVs these days are, let's say in the 4 to 500, anywhere from 300 to 500 nit range. So even if it's only 500 nits, that's 5 times more brightness degrees that you've got to show off your image.
But it's not 5 times because it is a logarithmic curve, so it's not 5x the brightness.
Yeah, it's not 5x the brightness. Well, see, I don't look at it so much as the brightness, but I look at it more as you've got more shades of brightness. Does that make sense?
It does, but peak brightness is definitely
am I right
higher.
In that sort of how I'm
describing? Yeah, and I mean peak brightness is significantly higher, but going to 500 is not 5x. Going to 1000 is not 10x.
Yes,
it's
10 times.
like
yes, you're correct.
2.5 or something. I don't remember the numbers.
Yeah,
but it is very, very noticeable, massively noticeably brighter.
Yeah, and that's like the example that I give. And yeah. So technically, very often technically I'm wrong, but but from a feeling point of view, I'm right. So the way that I describe it is, let's say for example we're doing a car commercial, and we want to show off the tail lights of a car, and it's a night shoot, and we're doing one of those cool kind of wraparound shots around the tail light of the car. With SDR, I would have to choose whether I'm going to make the taillights really bright because I really want the taillights to pop because that's the part that the manufacturer wants to show off. But if the taillights really pop, I don't have a lot of wiggle room or a lot of degrees of brightness around the brightness of those taillights. Everything else in the shadows in that image or the midtones is pretty much just going to be black because I don't have a lot of space to work within that range. Whereas with HDR, because I've got so much more range to work with, I can make the taillights of that car really pop, but I can still show you the detailing of the back of the car, even though it's in shadow. So that, for me, as a storyteller, is the advantages that I feel that HDR gives me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of HDR that you look at, and I think it's important to point out too, and I don't want to turn this into a basics of HDR because we've definitely done that, and anybody who's watching this who wants to know more about the basics of HDR, it is on my channel, on this live channel. I did a live show probably, 4 or 5 months ago that was all about the basics of HDR. It was a complete walkthrough. So definitely check that out if you want to know more of that level of it. But one of the things you see a lot of is super saturated because you can, and that's often, That's kind of the mark of someone who just learned how to do HDR, and they take everything up to 11 in their saturation, and it hurts to look at and it looks totally unreal. But then eventually they go, okay, I get it. We use it. We use it. It's like salt in a recipe. Just you got to use the right amount in the right places. You get too much, and the whole thing's ruined. So yeah, so HDR is a lot of fun. Now, are you doing HDR for any of your clients?
No.
Really?
Um,
Okay.
and well, not that they would know, I suppose is the way that I would describe it, because most of my stuff, and again, I haven't worked nearly as much as I would have liked to in the last year and a
Sure.
half. But most of my stuff, to be honest, is not that exciting. I'm excited about what my I'm excited about. In fact, I think it's actually really exciting to let me pull my foot up on my mouth quickly in case any of my clients seeing this. But what it's not exciting in terms of like it's we're not selling helicopters or super yachts.
Right.
So it's, a lot of stuff I'm doing is medical tools or yeah, just stuff that you can't get too creative visually with it.
Right.
So it's not that important to
Sure,
show,
sure.
and a lot of it is talking heads. Like we do a ton of case studies, and with a case study, look, it's nice to do HDR when you've got a corporate CEO with those beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows behind them, and you're able to actually show a little bit more of the exposure
Sure.
behind them, and then well exposed, and you've got a bit more wiggle room of that. But it, just like you say, it's actually better. It's almost I think, like with a lot of things, it's almost good HDR is if someone doesn't really notice.
Mm. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. You see those occasional things, you're like, ooh, that's pretty. Ooh, that's really pretty. Yeah.
Mm,
It's funny because if you look at something, and I'm sure you've experienced this, you look at your same project in HDR and then in SDR. The SDR one feels massively dark and dim and undersaturated until you look at it for a while, you get used to it, then it's perfectly normal. Then you go back to the HDR one, you're like, oh, this is so blown. It's just too much. It's too much. But then you get used to it. It's really hard to go back and forth between them. And that is a challenge when you're
yeah,
grading HDR, but then you also have to do an SDR deliverable. You almost have to walk away from it for a while and then come back and look at it and just grade it as a SDR and not try to forget what it looked like in HDR because you're never going to get there, and you don't want it to be competing.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
I
crazy.
actually like when I'm doing my SDR grades of an
Mm,
HDR project, I actually try and ignore the viewer and just look at the scopes and just sort of like almost kind
sure.
of get it into the first of all, start off, get it into SDR by numbers, like get it right in scopes, and then watch through and make sure there's no huge, oh, that looks awful. And yeah, good, thank you.
Yeah. One of the cool things about HDR that I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with it, aren't doing it, don't realize is that you don't shoot in HDR. You just shoot in log, the same
Mm,
as you've been shooting. And yeah, you can shoot in RAW for sure, and you get some advantages there, but you don't have to shoot in RAW to do HDR. You do have to shoot in log to do HDR. You can't, I mean, you can take a shot that was shot in a Rec 709 with a baked in look and you can kind of stretch it, but you're really forcing things where they don't belong and you can't get away with very much of it. But if you need to insert a quick shot, you might be able to get away with it. But
yeah.
you don't have to shoot raw. You do have some advantages. You do have to shoot log, but that's all you have to do is shoot log, which all pro cameras can do already. So it really comes down to just needing an
Well,
HDR monitor.
wouldn't you also, I mean, technically 10-bit log, because
Well,
there's
yes,
plenty
but
of
I think
cameras out there that
I
shoot
think that kind
8-bit
of
log.
goes hand in hand. I guess technically you can shoot 8-bit log, but if you're shooting 8-bit log, I mean, what's the bloody point? There's zero reason to shoot 8-bit log. Um, so I'm sure cameras can do it, but when I say log, I'm assuming people are
Drones.
shooting 10-bit. Really?
Uh, Not so much now, but up until the current crop of them, like if you're talking about this, like the smaller DJI ones,
Hmm.
I think even the Mavic 2 Pro, I think the Mavic 2 Pro, does it do 10-bit or is it still 8-bit? I'm not sure. But like
Yeah, I
I
don't know.
definitely know, like at least I know the first Mavic because I had that one, was only 8-bit.
Hmm.
So,
Interesting.
and that it's interesting. I've had an interesting conversation about this, and I think my take on that is, like you were saying, like if you had like a 10-second drone shot that's only 8-bit, throw it in there. You'll be all right. Like it's not the
You
end
get
of the
away
world,
with it, yeah.
but don't don't like make like half of your project 8-bit stuff that's come
Right.
off. Like being a Sony boy, we've only gone to 10-bit in the last sort of generation of cameras.
Mm.
So the A7S Mark II was 8-bit. Only the A7S Mark III, which came out around this time last year, was 10-bit in the Alpha line. So a lot of stuff has been shot on the Alpha series of cameras, particularly A7S Mark II, in log because they have log, but it was all 8-bit.
Oh, interesting. Huh. Well, I did not know that. Being a Lumix boy, I've been seeing 10-bit for years and years. So, sorry. And what about
Yeah, a
HLG?
Sony boy slumming it.
Yes, yes, yes. What are your thoughts on HLG?
I'm confused, I guess. It's and it depends what flavor of HLG you're talking about, because that's also gone quite a bit of a gamut, in the sense of, it was originally developed by the BBC and NHK for broadcast, kind of like again, technically I know I'm wrong, but to explain it, I always sort of call it, it's HDR light, and from that point of view, again, like if you've got a fast turnaround time, but you want to have a little bit of HDR in there and you don't want to do too much, you don't have time to do too much with it, why not?
That's fair. The way that I've always explained it is the correlation. Again, this isn't technically accurate, but it makes sense. Is that shooting HLG is kind of like shooting JPEG, whereas shooting log is kind of like shooting RAW, and for still meaning still photos, of course. Where with the log footage you can do a lot to the image, whereas if you've got a JPEG, there's not a whole lot you can do. You can do a little bit to it, but not a whole lot. And what you get shooting HLG is already in HDR with the SDR conversion log built in, not LUT, what's the gamma curve built into it, hybrid log gamma, that's the second part of it. So the gamma curve built into it to convert it to SDR, and the whole point, like you said, is developed by NHK and the BBC so that they could do HDR broadcasts that would simultaneously be playable on HDR and SDR TVs. And it's great for things like sports, right? Where it's a live event where you want to shoot, you want to broadcast HDR. There's no conversion. You just shoot like any normal camera. And if you're on an HDR TV, you get HDR. If you're on an SDR TV, you see SDR. And that's brilliant. It's great for that. But as far as shooting in it for editing and for I'm definitely like, no, just don't, because you're going to get a lot more with log. You have to work for it. But
yeah, it's again, like if you've got the time, then don't shoot with it.
Right.
But like, for example, there's a job that obviously we didn't do it this year or last year, but there's a job we used to have every year. Again, a corporate event. It's like an awards ceremony. And so the participants each need to do a 45-minute presentation to a panel full of CEO judges.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's 6 of them. So there's 6 presentations throughout the day. And what we needed to do was we need to shoot a pre and post interview with each one of the participants, like how you feeling, like why do you love doing this award, all that kind of stuff. Then so that's me in one room shooting the interview. Then they go and do their presentation. I've got another team of 2 in the other room, one of them live streaming it, another one just capturing B-roll, and we're doing that throughout the day. And then I have to deliver 6 complete highlight interview reels of each of the participants for the award ceremony that night.
Yeah, got it.
So in that half-hour gap between interviews, I'm editing like crazy little munchkin, putting these things all together. And like for something like that, HLG is perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Very good. Let's see if there's any other questions that people want to ask. There is one that came up. It goes back to when we were talking about the setup. So let me hit the right magic buttons here and bring this up. No, not that one. That's already up. It is this one here. Oop, there we go. Is that better and easier than using the Blackmagic Design streaming bridge, the ATEM streaming bridge? So he's talking about the Mimo Live call system we have now. It is certainly easier because Lee does not have to have any special hardware to do a Mimo call. I send him a link, and he could even call in from the phone. Doesn't work. An iPad kind of works sometimes. I'm definitely using a laptop or a proper computer is better, but that's all he needs. And he could even be on a webcam. Obviously, it wouldn't look this good, but technically he only needs a computer with a webcam to connect to me. Whereas to connect into an ATEM streaming bridge, he has to have an ATEM Mini Pro or better. So that's the only way to connect to a streaming bridge. And initially, we tried to do it on a streaming bridge. Like we said in the very beginning, we've been trying to do this call for
Oh
6
boy, did
months.
we.
And we've had so many problems getting the streaming bridge to work properly. And he's in Australia, and we don't know if it's a distance thing or what, but it just wasn't working. Even though I've used the streaming bridge for this exact thing many times, for some reason, coming from Oz, it just wasn't working. So I don't know what the deal is there. And that's why we gave up on that and
Yeah,
decided to try
and
this.
yeah, and we tried, like, we tried different connections. We were back and forth with Blackmagic support
Yep.
for a while, and we just could not.
Did you ever try a new
the amount
ATEM?
of testing I've done.
Yeah.
No, I didn't. I really should do that.
It's kind of the last thing, because I
hate to
have
think that,
3
but it-
bridges, and we tried streaming to all 3 bridges. I have 2 ISPs feeding into my studio. We swapped between the ISPs, made no difference. There's basically nothing else that I could change on my end. So and we changed everything. It's got to. I blame your ATEM. It's got to be something wrong with the
Yeah,
ATEM,
it's got to be something with that. Yeah, you're right. I
or
should just
something
get
with
into
your
it.
ISP that
I
is
could borrow-
blocking, like somehow blocking
Well,
that
no,
stream.
because we tried with my cell connection as well.
Oh, right.
We tried streaming it through my phone, and we had the exact same issue.
That's right, we did.
So it's not yeah, it's not even the
ISP.
ISP,
It's
because
gotta
that would
be
be
the
one of
hardware.
the first things you think of.
It's got to be the hardware.
Yeah.
Yeah, bummer. Yeah, see if you get your hands on one. We'll give it another
I've
try.
been in lockdown for I've been in lockdown for so long. I don't need it.
Speaking of lockdown, we got somebody else watching.
And you, yeah.
Some from Melbourne saying hi from rainy lockdown Melbourne. There you go. Lockdown all over your country.
G'day. Yeah, it's. Hey, look. At least, well, actually, no. It's only the 2 big states that are locked down. It's sort of like Melbourne and Sydney, and the rest of the country is free and breezy.
Oh, nice for them.
Yeah, good for them.
Well, if anybody has any other questions, get them in there. We're going to wrap this up pretty soon, but get those questions in. We do have one that came up. Mr. Don Brooksby says, story time. Both of you, have you had to make a really boring product shine and you really liked the final shoot?
Yes to the first one. Let me think about the second one.
Yeah, I mean, making boring things shine is, I guess, that's par for the course. I don't know that
That's you know what? Actually, but again, I can't go into too much detail. But I was really proud of the final product. So basically, what it was: 2-day shoot, corporate client. This was for delivery again for an online conference, and the first day was 4 different people, each doing a talking head, 2 camera on a teleprompter, different setups for each person, and then the day 2 was all 4 people Q&A, sort of not really close to each other because this was between lockdowns, so we were still sort of COVID safe and we had to have distance between the people. But it was a beautiful setup, and it was like each one of those shots, I was really proud that, we lit it well. It sounded great. There were some technical challenges, things that I had to mask out in the. I think my camera's just gone. No, that's probably my end, because I reckon the battery's either gone.
we can still hear you.
Or let me just change batteries. Yeah, so I reckon it's. I think my camera's just gone flat. Let me just change batteries.
Okay, so you guys can still hear him. I'm going to just go put me on screen, and while he's changing the batteries. So I try to think of a story for myself, and I don't know. Fortunately, I tend to not take too many boring projects. I try to take only kind of coolish, interesting ones. But that's not fair. I've obviously done some boring things. I don't know. I guess the boring things were just boring. Back I used to do a lot of portraiture and never was really into it. So family stuff, family portrait kind of things that were not terribly exciting. I don't know. It's a good question. I'm sorry I don't have a good answer. Oh, look, he's back already. There we go.
So that project, I was like it looked like beautifully lit TV, and my favorite part of that was the Q&A. There was budget, so I actually brought a gaffer in, so I didn't have to worry about lighting it, which is great if you can get someone else to do the lighting. And the way he lit the one side was just awesome. It was an aperture 600D being shot with the Fresnel being shot through a shower curtain.
Okay.
And this just did this beautifully soft spread. And I'm not going to tell you how much the client was paying, but the budget that was used on this job, and I was like, we're lighting you guys through a shower curtain. And it looked beautiful. I'm trying to think, there's definitely been some other things that I was, what, there's a couple of ones that I did. Um, there was one that I did with a friend of mine. So a really good mate of mine. He's from he grew up in a country town called Cobram, and they had a mill, not a mill. What's tall thingy? Grain silo.
Silo.
They had
Yeah.
this giant grain silo in the middle of the town. Yeah. And it hadn't been used for like 20 years. And there'd been all these ideas of using it for tourism and all this kind of thing. And he'd written like a report in primary school about using it for tourism or something like that. And they were finally going to knock it down. He said, hey, why don't we just drive up there and just interview some people and talk about, this grain silo being knocked down? And we drove up there, and it was just a really cool, we had lots of fun with drones and getting like tractors going through fields. And, again, it was a story about a grain silo being knocked down, but it was just so cool talking to people about how that grain silo had been such a central part of this community within the town.
Yeah. That's cool.
I was pretty proud of that one.
Yeah.
Again, where you think it's a bit about a grain silo, but I was really chuffed with the way, and it was like we shot it in a day, and I edited like in an afternoon. Actually, I will send a link to you if we can get it out somewhere. Another one that I did, which I was really proud of. Again, this was all Simon's idea, for a portable Nespresso machine. And he had the idea, like we shot this just for, things and giggles. And like we shot it in an hour one morning in a park by his house. I edited it like in an hour, and he's a brilliant actor. So it looks, anyway, I will send you the link if you're able to share it somehow.
Yeah, we can just put it in the description down below. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's good. I think because a lot of my projects,
there was some good comedic timing.
Yeah, oh, nice. Well, that helps. That makes all the difference, doesn't it? Most of my projects are me. A lot of my projects are me on camera, and so it's not like I don't really do product videos or stories like you do that people hire me to do. It tends to be more things that I'm shooting and coming up with all this stuff on my own, type of a show off this product, show off this this camera related product, show off this software, and training on it and so on. So it's just a bit of a different world. But I do want to say a big, huge thank you, both Darren Land and Don Brooksby. I can't bring those up on screen for some reason, but thank you for the super chats. That is very, very much appreciated. Darren said, good episode. Nice to come home a little buzzed after a long day at work to watch and listen to an informational tech brainstorming session. Oh, sorry, I can't bring it up. My system doesn't bring up the chat from the super chats. That's really interesting to figure that one out. But thank you. And thank you, Dawn, as well. Juka has a question. Let me bring this one back up. And here we go. Juka saying, this is the guy from Finland, saying, what is the best way to use ProRes RAW in Resolve? Ooh, I'm not a Resolve editor. I only go there to do a little bit of special color work.
As far as I know, at the moment you can't. So what you would have to do is bring the ProRes RAW footage into Final Cut. I think you can do this in Compressor now. So you could do it, and it would be much easier to do it in Compressor because you could just drag a whole bunch of different files in and
build proxies.
But yeah, you'd have to proxy it out as ProRes 444 or whatever you're going to work with. So unfortunately at the moment, Blackmagic Raw isn't supported in Final Cut, and ProRes RAW isn't supported inside of DaVinci Resolve, and they both kind of go, oh well, no, they can support it, why don't they support it? And it'd be nice, I hate it when mum and dad fight, and it'd be nice if they can all just get along. And I'd love to have ProRes RAW in DaVinci, and I'd love to have Blackmagic RAW in Final Cut. There might be some technical issues that I'm not aware of because developing is hard.
Sure.
But to my knowledge, I think they both have. I don't know why, but there you go. So yeah, if you want to use Blackmagic RAW in Final Cut, well, actually, that'd be a little bit easier because you could shoot the Blackmagic RAW, bring it into DaVinci, and then just use the proxy to Final Cut thing within DaVinci. You've got that option. Do all your editing in Final Cut, and then round trip it back to DaVinci, and you could do your final grades in DaVinci.
I mean, you could do that the other way around as well, because you can go from Final Cut, export an XML into Resolve, and then loop it back for sure. Yeah.
So you, well, you could XML, but then that XML can't be pointing back to the ProRes RAW files because DaVinci isn't going to understand the ProRes RAW files. You'd have to have the XML pointing to ProRes versions of the ProRes raw files, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Which you could render the proxies. Yeah, I guess it might require some XML modification because you could render out the proxies from Final Cut that Resolve could read, and then
Yes. Yeah, that'd be fine.
yeah, and it could actually be without having to re-render or modify the XML. You could simply swap the files. If you kept the files the same name, your originals and your proxies the same name, you could swap out the locations, right? So you've got your original folder, quit Final Cut, take all the ProRes RAW out of there, drop your proxies in, and then load it up in Resolve. Or actually, Resolve will just let you reconnect. You just reconnect to different originals in a different folder. That should work too.
Yeah.
In theory.
Yeah. But you've got to create those. If you went, basically in either direction, you've got to create proxies.
Yeah, and in either direction, you're going to have to finish in the other editor to take advantage of the raw format. So yeah, that's too bad. Yeah, hopefully, like you said, sucks and mom and dad fights. Hopefully they can get that sorted out. That would be nice. That would be nice. Let's see here. Dawn says, great geeky, oops, there it comes. Great geeky fun. Thanks, guys. Why, you're quite welcome. We're having geeky fun too. And we've got somebody saying, I'm stuck in a traffic jam on my way home after getting my first jab. Oh my, you are keeping us well entertained. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And congratulations on getting the first jab. That's great. And this can't happen everywhere fast enough, can it? And we do have another question here. Robert saying, would love to hear and see a director commentary on the grain silo video. Thanks again for this, for the time you guys are giving. You're quite welcome. I guess I need to rearrange things so it's not quite so high there. Anyway, yeah, I guess does that video you have, is there a commentary version of BTS, a director's cut?
No, but I think we did that like 3 or 4 years ago. I wouldn't even remember what I'd say on the commentary. Like I'd have to watch it and go, what were we doing there? Yeah. If you have any questions, I mean, I've chucked the link in the chat. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments on that video, and I'll try and answer them as best I can. But yeah, I don't. Yeah, I mean, there was my first memory is we had to get a shot of a car driving into his school because he mentioned his school, in the little thing where he was talking, and I remember he had to drive my car, and my car's quite low, and the school had quite a big speed bump, and I was a bit concerned about that. Other than that, I can't think of any other director's commentary, but there's a little snippet of director's commentary on that.
That's funny. Drop the link into our side chat because it didn't show up in here because you're not an admin on this call,
okay.
And so it's blocking. YouTube is blocking it.
Okay, cool.
And I'll post it in.
When you say side chat, what are you?
Our messages chat that we have going.
Okay, cool.
I'm trying to figure out where
there's the first one.
I'll find the second one. There we go.
And you can see how good I am with platforms. One's on Vimeo, one's on YouTube. It's I'm all over the place.
All right, here we go. And copy that. All right, so these are now showing up in the chat. There we go. And not that anybody should try and type them, copy them from the screen, but if for some reason you can't get to it, screenshot that, retype it, and then there's the second one, screenshot that and retype that, and there you go. So perfect. Yeah, we'll
it's funny that we're talking about color. Like I'm even just looking at the thumbnail of the portable coffee one, and that would have been shot. I think we shot that on an A7S Mark I, probably. Maybe an A7S Mark II. And I look at that like overcast, like
it's very flat.
Like I look at that and I go, oh, I look at that and I go, if I could have shot that in ProRes RAW, imagine how much more I could have done with it. Because I remember struggling with the grade on that. I mean, look, I spent all of half an hour grading it, so I didn't put that much.
How much? There's a question since you do shoot. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So since you do obviously shoot in ProRes RAW a fair amount, how much benefit do you see in ProRes RAW versus ProRes?
Good question. The honest answer is I'm not sure. It's because ProRes, but it's one of those things where it's not that ProRes RAW is bad. It's just this ProRes is so good.
Right. So the advantage is, for anybody who doesn't know, is that you can, in Final Cut, you can change the ISO. So whatever your ISO is, you can actually change it in software. And I need to do some tests, and it sounds like you're going to say something about it. I need to do some tests to see, if you shoot it at 400 and then set it to 12,000 versus shooting it in 12,000 and setting it to 400 in software, what the difference really is.
Yeah, is
I
that
do need to
real?
do some tests there for sure.
Well, also what I was going to say is being able to change the ISO and also being able to change the white balance
Yep.
Has only been around for about a year,
Right.
and is not still, both those functions are not still available across all cameras. I'm looking at you, Sony.
Yeah.
So
We've got it.
my camera's just got
sorry.
an update. Oh, shut up. Yeah, well, you know what? I just get it right in camera. So
Yeah, sure. That's what they all say.
Well, this is something like one of the first things that I say when I'm doing my little workshops about RAW is I go, RAW is not magic. You still have to shoot well.
You still have to shoot well.
But it's nice to have options.
It
You're
is.
right. So the ISO and the white balance, again, bit of a wild west in terms of with some cameras you do and some cameras you don't. But here's another advantage, or let's say a difference between standard ProRes and ProRes RAW. So standard ProRes is fixed bit rates. So I think if memory serves, ProRes 422 is either
800?
122 or 222.
Oh,
it's something. There's a 2 in there
800?
somewhere. I'm gonna. You look it up. I'll talk.
I'll
you
look
look it up.
All right.
So there's a fixed bit rate for ProRes Proxy. There's a fixed bit rate for ProRes LT. Fixed bit rate for ProRes 422. So on and so forth. Whereas, and if you look at the ProRes graph that Apple put out when ProRes RAW first came out, ProRes RAW is kind of in between. It kind of goes up and down, and that's because ProRes RAW is variable, which is actually really cool. Well, there's cool and can be frustrating because I can't tell you how big your ProRes RAW files will be, because the way that it works is that, let's say you are filming someone who's not like, let's say we're filming a talking head and you're filming someone like me. I move around a lot. My hands move around. So there's a lot of changes within my frame. So the bitrate of me in ProRes RAW is going to be a little bit higher. Whereas if you got someone who doesn't talk with their hands and sits quite still, well, the bitrate on that footage is actually going to be lower because it doesn't need as many bits to capture that, because there's not a lot changing in the frame. So your bitrate will change on ProRes RAW depending on how much stuff is changing within your frame. So that's another advantage of it, where you're getting so much more data to play with relative, and that's why I shoot ProRes RAW so much, is that it's not that much bigger than 422. It is bigger, but it's not that much bigger than 422.
Right.
And you get so much more to play with.
Right. Exactly. So I'm looking at, I just opened up 3 ProRes clips these are all 4K 2997, and each one of them is basically 412.5 megabits per second, all within a few kilobits of each other.
I knew there was a 2 in there.
So, yeah, so it's big, it's certainly bigger than what you get out of most cameras if you're shooting internally, and it is very good. I mean, ProRes really is very, very good, for sure. For sure.
I'm really looking forward to seeing what flavor of ProRes is going to be on the new iPhones.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually the question that came up here. Let me see here. Let me get this chat going the right way. And Robert says, you two need to do a review of the iPhone ProRes when it comes out. There you go. Making work for you guys. That would be fun. I mean, it'd certainly be interesting to see. I actually did not.
Yeah.
I'm not buying a 13. I'm skipping that one because I've got the 12 and it's fine. I don't need an iPhone that does ProRes. I've got about 30 cameras in here that I can shoot with ProRes, so I don't really need an iPhone that does it. But it is obviously very compelling. It's interesting.
I will, as soon as I can. Stock's a bit meh at the moment, but I'm really curious to see how that works, because I mean, I shot a pilot on all iPhones last year, just to see if I could.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's a whole other story, and that was shot in 8-bit, because that was shot on the 11 Pro. And the thing, again, happy to share a link if you want, because it's up on my YouTube channel. So the idea was this travel show. 2020 was just such a great time to be pitching a travel show. God. But anyway, we shot the pilot because I wanted to see if we could do it.
Yeah.
Because I love watching the behind the scenes of the shot on iPhone ads that Apple puts out.
Sure.
But every time when you watch the shot on iPhone things, you watch the behind the scenes thing, and there's like 3 lighting trucks and a crew of 40. It's like, well, like an oil painting would look good with that kind of lighting.
Yeah.
So what
terrible.
I wanted to see was, could we actually shoot good content that looks good using just whatever light is available to us? And if I do say so myself, I think we did a heck of a job. So I'm really curious to see how much better, I'm not saying it will be better, but I want to see if and how much better it is getting 10-bit ProRes on a phone. Because at the end of the day, there is still the laws of physics.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to see how that works out.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, I'm gonna make this the last comment, and then we're gonna wrap this thing up. Yuka is saying that ProRes have camera corrections, but RAW does not. Another thing to add to that is noise removal. Right, there is no denoising in the RAW file. You have to do that in the computer if the file needs it, which it doesn't if it's shot at a lower ISO. But if you do take it up to a high ISO, then it's got noise, and you do need to run a denoising, and that is very resource intensive. That will bring your computer to its knees. So that is something that you have to consider if you're shooting RAW as well. Shooting RAW is a lot more work. You know, it's like shooting log versus shooting a baked-in look. Log is more work. And you go to RAW, it's more work yet again. So you don't necessarily want to do it all the time.
But having said that, I will also say that, and again, I'm so into the Kool-Aid, so I'm blatantly biased. I'm happy to admit that. ProRes RAW, as RAW goes, is pretty light on the computer. Like, you know, if you've ever worked with Cinema DMG RAW, you know, it's like comparing running a marathon to walking in molasses.
Right. It's when you get into, it's not, when I'm saying it's more work, it's not about the computer has to work harder. It is that you do have to be aware that you may have to add noise reduction, which
absolutely,
can definitely be an issue. And like
out of the camera, it will look not great.
Right. It will need some extra work, but what you can do with it is pretty sweet. Okay, I think it's time to wrap this thing up. We've already gone. Oops, forgot to turn that one off first. There we go. We've gone a little bit over, but that is okay. This was fun. It got very geeky, which is exactly what I expected to happen today, which is always awesome. I'm sure we could do this for another 5 hours and just keep on going down that geeky rabbit hole. Thanks again to both Darren and Dawn for the super chat. Super appreciated. That is always very, very welcome. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do be sure you're subscribed to this one. Also be sure you subscribe to the main PhotoJoseph channel, which is where all the edited videos go up. This channel is just for the live. Lee, anything that you would like to promote, shout out, tell people to subscribe to? I just realized that I've got your Twitter handle next to a YouTube logo, but I don't think you really have a YouTube channel, do you?
Well, I've got a YouTube channel. Like, if you follow the Cobram link and the iPhone link, those are my YouTube channel. But I am not a YouTuber, so I post stuff when I've worked on an interesting project that I'm allowed to share, because most of the stuff I do is under NDA.
Right.
Or if I find a cool Final Cut or Apple tip or trick that I go, oh, I think people should know about this. So I post very infrequently. Also, quite frankly, I've been quite depressed during COVID, so I haven't been in the mood to post stuff. But please do sign on to my YouTube thing. It's great because you can subscribe and I'll hardly ever bother you.
But do follow us both on Twitter.
Yeah.
So these names are also the Twitter names that you're seeing on there. Do follow us on Twitter because there's loads of joyous nuggets of clever wisdom and profanity up there.
Oh boy, is there.
All right, guys. Hey, thanks again, everybody, for tuning in today. Super appreciate it. Thank you, Lee, for coming on in the middle of your Thursday, a whole day into the future from here. Fascinating how you are into the future over there in the land of Australia.
And thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been fun. We'll do this again. We'll have to get, maybe next time there's a major Final Cut update. That'll be a good time to do it. And then we can debate the qualities of whatever comes out next. Yeah. That'd be fun. Yeah, we'll have to do that. All right, guys. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time. Ciao.
Bye.